Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with summer sausage. That's right, it takes months to make a proper summer sausage. But as I'm just about to show you, we can make an improper one in just a few days. And despite taking some massive shortcuts, the results really are impressive. And above and beyond the wonderful taste and texture, it's always kind of nice eating a sausage where we know exactly what is in it. I mean, I like a little mystery in my life, but not that kind. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by smashing up some diced celery with a little bit of salt in this mortar. And by the way, if you want, you can just mince this really fine with a knife. But by smashing it, I think we're going to end up with something a little juicier. And in case you're wondering, we're not just doing this for the flavor, but also because celery contains nitrates, which is actually going to help cure our sausage. But anyway, if we're using this method, we'll go ahead and work that over until it looks a little something like this. At which point we will add that to 2 pounds of freshly ground beef, which does not have to be freshly ground by us, but you should actually go to the butcher counter and have them grind this for you, or at least make sure they freshly ground the one in the case. What we want to try to avoid is buying the stuff that's already packaged. And then to this we will also add some garlic powder, which is not garlic salt, it's just dehydrated garlic that's been ground. We will also add in a whole bunch of smoked paprika, as well as a generous amount of whole mustard seeds, followed by copious amounts of freshly ground black pepper, and kosher salt, not to mention exactly 3 shakes of cayenne. And then we will finish up with 2 technically optional ingredients. A little bit of pink curing salt, which I will discuss in detail in the blog. And no, it is not the same thing as pink Himalayan salt. And then last but not least, I'm going to add in a little bit of sugar. And that's it. Once we have everything together, we're going to go ahead and give this a very thorough mixing, preferably with our clean bare hands. And this is one of those rare times where our fear of undermixing should actually be greater than our fear of overmixing. Okay, so we're going to want to get in there and get in there deep and continue mixing until we are absolutely certain that everything is perfectly distributed. And then what we'll do once we think everything's been thoughtfully combined is transfer that onto some parchment paper where we will attempt to shape it into some kind of uniform log. And as usual, we'll want to dampen our fingers so the meat doesn't stick to our hands. And as we're doing this, we want to try to prevent any large pockets of air from being trapped inside. So be sure to really press and push this firmly. And what we're shooting for here is something about 3 or 4 inches wide. And then what we'll do once that's been accomplished is go ahead and roll this up. And as we're doing this, not only are we trying to get this nice and uniform, but we're also trying to get it as compact and compressed as possible. And then once that's rolled, we'll go ahead and twist the ends as tight as we can to create what is basically a giant beef spleef. And then once that's set, we'll go ahead and transfer that onto a paper towel-lined sheet pan. Because before we wrap this in foil and cook it, we need to pop it in the fridge just like this for 24 hours. So that is exactly what I did. And then the next day we'll go ahead and pull that out and get it ready for the oven. Which means we will first cut off any excess parchment paper from either end. And then we'll go ahead and unroll it and proceed to smoke it. And when I said smoke it, I did the air quotes, because we're not really going to smoke it. But we're just going to simulate that by using some liquid smoke that I'm going to dilute in a little bit of cold fresh water. And while you could of course just add some of this liquid smoke to the meat mix, I much prefer this method because if we add it along with the other ingredients, it's very easy to overdo it. Plus, when we actually smoke something, the flavor of course comes from the outside in, so I feel like this method gives us something much closer to the real deal. And what we'll do once we have that mixed up is go ahead and generously brush that all over, as well as we can also brush some on the paper. And then once our liquid smoke mixture has been applied, we'll go ahead and roll this back up, at which point it's ready to transfer onto a large piece of heavy-duty foil, or several sheets of regular foil. And just like when we rolled this in the paper, we really want to make sure we're compressing and compacting this as much as possible. And again, that's to avoid any large bubbles or crevices in the middle once it's baked. Okay, so we're going to roll that up nice and tight. And when we're done, what we'll do is take both ends and twist them in opposite directions, which will help compress things even further. And then once that's set, we can transfer that on top of a baking rack that we placed in a sheet pan. And once we figured out where the bottom's going to be, we will sort of roll that over and we will poke about 5 or 6 holes through the foil, which will allow some of the excess moisture to drip out. And that's it. Our sausage is now ready to transfer into the center of a 275-degree oven for about an hour and a half, or until we've reached an internal temp of exactly 150. And by the way, do not under any circumstances go past 150. Otherwise, too much of the fat will render out and the texture will not be as good. which is why I like to use one of these probe thermometers, which will ring an alarm when you reach your target temperature. And then what we'll do as soon as this comes out is absolutely nothing. All right, just simply let it sit there until it reaches room temp, at which point we'll give both ends another twist to sort of compress it even further, and then refrigerate this at least overnight. Okay, a couple nights is probably even better. At which point we can finally pull it out and unwrap it. Really quickly. And I'll be the first to admit, this might not be the best looking meat log you've ever seen, but we'll get to the appearance in a minute. For now, I'm going to slice in to see how we did on the interior. And if everything goes according to plan, we should get a beautiful, smooth, solid cut, with no giant crevices or air pockets. I mean, you're always going to get a few small air bubbles here and there. But as far as a homemade summer sausage goes, that's about as good as we can expect. Although I did have a brief moment of panic here, because I was like, what the heck is that red thing? I don't remember putting any red ingredients in. But then I remembered the smoked paprika, so that must have been caused by a tiny chunk of that stuff that didn't break up. And what are the odds that my knife hit that exact tiny spot when slicing this? Well, apparently roughly 100%. But despite that tiny flaw, I was absolutely thrilled with how this came out, and I celebrated by eating a little slice off the end, which really was magnificent. And if we wanted, we could just slice this up and serve it as is. But I do like to do one extra optional step, and that would be to dust the outside with some freshly ground black pepper to sort of help improve that outside appearance. Which one slice, by the way, is going to be fine, but I do think this looks a little better if we dust on something. So what I like to do here is coat that with black pepper, and then transfer it onto some crinkled up foil, and then let it air dry in the fridge uncovered for one additional day. Which I think not only gives the outside a more finished appearance, but it's also going to allow our sausage to dry out just a little bit, and allow those flavors to concentrate and develop even further. So you go ahead and decide if you want to do this or not. I mean, you are, after all, the MVP of your homemade charcuterie. But if you can wait one more day, I do recommend it. And that's it. The next day we can pull it out and go ahead and slice it up and go in for the official taste. And for something where we've shaved off a couple months of production time and didn't actually let it ferment and cure properly or even be smoked properly, the results are still very, very impressive. I mean, this stuff has pretty much the exact taste and texture of that certain summer sausage you're used to from the gift baskets. And as far as serving goes, you could simply do this off the cutting board, or take it up to the next level and include it in your very own custom-made charcuterie platter, garnished with some of the usual suspects. And if you've never had this stuff before, it's basically like a garlicky, slightly smoky salami, which is why, of course, it's so good with a little mustard on a cracker, paired with some cheese. And once again, I'm sorry, I threw away the package and I'm not sure what that is, although it appears to be a washed rind goat cheese. And by the way, speaking of salami, do not think of this video as a recipe. This was all about the technique. And by switching up the meats and the spices and the flavorings and the size you make it, you could produce other similar type sausages, like maybe a pepperoni or a soppressata, or even those little spicy meat snack sticks. What are those called? Thin Jameses? Something like that. But anyway, whether you follow this exact formula or come up with your own very special variations, either way, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.